Meeting. Can you get Mrs. Dunning? She's on the phone?
Not yet,
Okay.
we're not there yet.
Okay. We're getting ready to get there. Yes.
It's not till 8,
Oh, okay.
so we're at
7D. Okay. All right, let's then, let's go to the 7D then. This does say code of conduct.
If I might,
It's on there twice then. It's on the agenda twice.
no, if I'm,
is.
Maybe different subject, but it's on there.
Okay, you're going to give the overview and then we go into the actual document.
I'll
Okay.
explain what's
Okay, go
going
ahead.
on. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. I realise it's late, so much appreciate your continuing time and attention, as this is all very important. There's a recommendation from Workstream 4. This workstream responded to an interest that was identified in the evaluation in CalPERS board having its own code of conduct that would set out expectations of board members for themselves and for fellow board members. This is not intended to be a legal document. It's intended to set out expectations on behaviour and to deal with issues around confidentiality, cordiality, and respect. This workstream recommendation is to develop and afterwards adopt a board code of conduct. A first reading of a potential draft follows in an information action after this section of the agenda. But this is the action item to develop and adopt a code of conduct. The code itself needs more work. The board will discuss it and then, when appropriate, come back to agree. A bit like with the curriculum. The decision today was to develop a board curriculum, but that's obviously going to take time, and the work will come back. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And the workstream leads may like to add to that, if I haven't characterised it properly.
Yeah, Miss Taylor.
So just to clarify, because I think we're all confused. So here, we're just voting to develop and adopt a board code of conduct. We're not
In principle.
in principle. Okay. And then we go down to another one. We're going to do a first reading of a code of conduct. Got it. I just
Correct.
want to clarify for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, good. Mr. Perez?
So when do we have input on this part or the second part, or both parts?
Both. So this is to adopt, in principle, a code of conduct, and then later on in the agenda, there'll be a first reading of the working draft, which the two workstream leads are putting forward just for discussion. So it's in two pieces. In principle, does the board agree that it wants to develop and adopt a code of conduct? And then, here's the working draft for you to consider if that is approved. If it's not approved, then that discussion isn't needed. If the board decides it doesn't want a code of conduct, the second piece falls away. If the board agrees it does, then there's an opportunity to look at that first draft today. Thank you.
Ms. Pascal Rogers?
I'd like to make a motion to develop and adopt a board code of conduct.
Okay, been moved by Ms. Pascal Rogers. Second by Mr. Fechner. All in those favors say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The item passes. Okay? Number 5. Yeah.
You have public comment?
Yes, okay. Yep, we got, I'm wondering if they are really want to make their public comments when we talk about the document itself as opposed to this. Is that, did I interpret that correctly? Ms. Mr. Darby, Mr. Hutchins, you want to speak now or after we discuss the big item? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. So we'll hold on I know they signed up for this, but it's the next
Right.
item that they want to talk to. Okay, continue on.
Thank you. We now turn to Workstream 5. Moving swiftly along. Thank you. Could you move to the recommendation? And here it is. The recommendation. Workstream 5 had a number of board members, both there for the evaluation and who joined later, who've been giving input to the design of a new technology platform, which has the name Insight, which is not just a title, it's what it's meant to deliver for you. And the idea is that you will have a new board dashboard of what Rick Funston calls vital signs. And the purpose is to give you real-time management reporting, which will improve board oversight, but it will also, for information that's not confidential, it will give better reporting and transparency to all stakeholders. So this is the recommendation. You'll see in the agenda item that what's being proposed by the development team, Tim Taylor and friends, is that they will continue to get input from interested parties. They'll pilot it, intend to have a working, functional platform by the end of the year, but not intending the best to be the enemy of the good. This is something that will develop out in an iterative way, and once it's fully functional and tested, can replace the current arrangements, but not until. So the recommendation is before you, and I believe one of the beta teams, several members of the beta teams are here, who may like to comment on the recommendation or add to what I've said. Thank you.
Are there any comments from the work stream sponsors on this? Or are there any comments from other board members? Then with Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I was on the first flight of Insight, I'll say, and it's probably because I complained the most about the current tool we had. I like the fact that this will be available to our stakeholders and the public who want to see it, but I do have concerns that this is confidential, that you don't tag or track who's on the site, who's reading what documents, how much time they spend, because from a fiduciary liability point of view, you wouldn't want the board making decisions on investments when they actually never opened the item. If Insight is tracking that, that could be a serious legal problem for this board, including when we make decisions on the ALJ. If it tracks what we're doing, it could potentially be a problem for us. And that's why Diligent Books and all the other board books do not track what pages or what documents either board members or the public go to. I mean, of course, Diligent, of course, it can't be the public. It's only the board that could do that. But they don't track what pages you're on, how long you've spent. There's no tracking or tagging. And I want to make sure that we're not doing that with Insight as well.
Do you have a response to that?
I'm not aware that that was intended. I'm not sure if Tim Taylor's here. He is indeed.
I can answer that question.
Thank you,
It is
Marcy.
not designed to do any kind of tracking as you described, Ms. Brown.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I would just say that I saw the early versions of the Insight tool and was very impressed and had some thoughts that we shared. And then when I saw the later version, it was even better, and the responsiveness to the issues that I knew of that we had raised and others had raised was especially gratifying. So I'm really looking forward to the Insight tool. And I was curious whether our distinguished visitor, Ms. Dominguez, had a chance to look at the Insight tool and whether you had any thoughts to share in terms of your perspective on it.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I have not looked at it other than the presentation that I witnessed last month. I do know, for example, in the private sector, we use Diligent as an example of, or Board Vantage and some of these, and there's an assurance of confidentiality in the information that is posted in that portal. But based on what I was shown last month, I thought it was really a tremendous improvement over the information that's available now. And I think it could really help to make the meetings a lot more efficient because you'll have that way in advance.
Ms. Yee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to, I like the idea of this tool, but I wanted to see if we'd make it even more robust. And I had mentioned this last month, and that is to provide some room on the platform for reports from our consultants and communications from our consultants.
Okay. Okay, that can be done. I see head shaking. Yeah, okay. Ms. Oliveris?
I saw thumbs up from Mr. Taylor. No relation.
Ms. Oliveris?
Yes, I'd like to know the budget and fiscal impacts. Here it just says NA.
Would you like to join us here, Tim? Thank you.
Good evening, Timothy Taylor, CalPERS team member. Budget and fiscal impacts. At this point, what we're doing is in-house development for the product. We currently have approximately 2 full-time equivalents working on it, not steadily. What we do is we'll have periods of time where we work with the work streams, identify desired functionality, we'll make those adjustments. We look for the next opportunity to sit down and walk through. As Mr. Miller had mentioned, he had seen it, early iteration of it, and then he had seen subsequent iterations for it. Currently, we're not leveraging any consultants in its development. We're using open source tools. We're leveraging a lot of stuff that we've already developed. The NA right now is because we're still, even though we're developing it in an iterative fashion, we're still trying to gain an understanding of what the full scope will be, and it's really hard for us to commit to specific costs until we get that dialed in.
Could you give me a better understanding of the company's cost structure, just their business model when it comes to pricing?
It's custom developed. It's not a license agreement with any external vendor. It's being developed internally by state employees.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rufino?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So real quick, our office, as you know, we wanted the team that came sort of on the second half or later, whatever. And so first and foremost, we want to thank Ann and her staff for accommodating. As you can tell, that was perhaps not the highest priority for the newly elected state treasurer, but she certainly wanted to engage. As you all know, she's very hands-on. That said, she definitely supports. She's impressed with the design and the enhancement, and she definitely supports anything that provides better transparency and oversight on a more timely basis.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Ms. Pascal Rogers?
I'd like to move that we move forward building out Insight to provide a new dashboard for the board, stakeholders, and staff.
Good. Moved by Ms. Pascal Rogers. Second by who? Perez. Okay. Discussion. Ms. Taylor.
I actually just want to thank our team, and I want to thank the IT folks for, I'm very pleased to hear that we're using in-house state employees to create a system. That's unusual, so I do appreciate it.
Okay, so on the motion by Ms. Pascal Rogers, second by Mr. Perez, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hear none, the item passes. Thank you. Now we go to Code of Conduct. Okay. So do you need a minute to get Ms. Dunning on the phone? Okay. Huh? Okay.
Chair Jones, if I could just say, Carrie Dominguez has a flight to catch.
Okay.
And of course, we're running rather late on time, so she will have to be, she'll have to leave.
Okay.
But I wanted just to draw that to the board's attention and the governance committee in particular.
Thank you, Carrie.
But if I may, I just
Yeah.
want to say thank you. I think that it's been a real privilege working with you for the past year. But I also think that change is so hard, and that you, by taking on these action steps, you're following through, which is a lot of boards have their evaluations, and they identify recommendations, but then they fall short on the action steps. And so you're doing that, and I think that is a real credit to your courage and to your desire for continuous improvement. So it's been a real privilege to work with you, and of course, NACD continues to be available for any type of consult or service. But you do have a governance guru with you here, Nan Simpson. So, but thank you all for allowing me to be part of this effort.
Okay, thank you very much, and for all your services during this. And safe travels.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Dunning, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. So we're about to start on item 8A, the Code of Conduct. Ms. Simpson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everybody. With the board committee's agreement that a code of conduct be developed, hey presto, as if by magic, looking ahead, we have the first reading of work that has been underway over the summer. The draft has been developed with the leadership of the two workstream leads, and incorporates examples drawn together from other funds and best practice organizations. There was a discussion at the July offsite, as you will recall, and at that stage, proposed edits were included in an appendix, and I would like to put the record straight that there was some misinformation reported in the media about what the code was proposing. Specifically, I think there was a headline, a rather gory headline, suggesting it was intended as a gag order. But I think that was quoting part of the code out of context. If you looked at the workstream leads edits in the appendix, you would see that that was clearly not their recommendation. So following that discussion, what happened was it was direction to management to integrate all of the workstream leads edits from the appendix into the text, which is what you have before you, with one further addition which is taken from Robert's Rules of Order. There was some concern in that early discussion of the working draft that perhaps it was a little too vague in parts. So there was some existing language in Robert's Rules of Order which puts a little flesh on the bones around what is meant by conduct or misconduct, and that has been put forward into this draft. Other than that, addition from the workstream leads, from Robert's Rules of Order, which are currently the parliamentary guidance for CalPERS' own rules and guidelines. So if you like, this is already an existing standard. Other than that change, this is identical to the document that was discussed in its early form in July. So with that, Chair, I think look for your guidance on how to proceed regarding comments.
Sure.
And to the workstream leads to add to what I've just said, to make sure I haven't missed anything out or misconstrued anything that they intended. Thank you.
So we'll just entertain the questions from board members. Any part of the document, you've had it for some time now, and respond to those comments, and then we will seek a motion to accept this as a first reading. Okay, Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. And again, thank you, Anne, for your work on this. I wanted to jump out in front. I went through it earlier while we were sitting here. made some corrections that I thought were necessary. There's a lot of repeating of the same kind of either thought or actual statement throughout the document. So the first part of it is on 1.2, and y'all can disagree with me. I'm just pointing out these are repetitions. 1.2, the board duty is the board's duty to its participants and their beneficiaries shall take precedence over any other duty. And that was said basically in 1.1, which is the CalPERS Board of Administration. It is a 13-board board of trustees with fiduciary responsibility to pension system members and beneficiaries and healthcare benefits. The board shall discharge their duties with respect to the system solely in the interest of and for the exclusive purpose of providing benefits to participants and their beneficiaries. So it's all said there, and it's just you're repeating it. So if you get rid of that, then you can also get rid of the additionally, which is the next sentence. I don't think I saw, how many duties? I think it's repetitious to talk about, but I didn't cross it out. This code summarize in 1.3. This code summarizes a set of ethical expectations to promote a culture of integrity and accountability. And then this comma here, which I think this part is unnecessary, but nothing in this code should be considered as limiting duties, obligations, or fiduciary requirements with which board members must comply, which is in our 1.1. So we've already stated that. We already know. But that's just my opinion. Number 2 is a repetition of the same, number 2, duty of loyalty 2.1. It's a repetition of the same statement. Board members shall be free from conflicting personal interests and shall serve the interests of the CalPERS pension systems over those of any other person or group. And we have said this earlier. And then we did it again on 6. Number 6.1, it says board members will not allow personal bias, conflicts of interest, or the influence of other people to override their trustee responsibilities. So, hold on, I think we did it one more time. Oh yeah, we did. 8.2, members will not allow bias, conflicts of interest, or the influence of other people to override their fiduciary responsibilities and loyalty to the beneficiary. So there's a few words tweaked here and there, but it's the same thing over and over again. We don't need it, I think. Hold on, let me go make sure. Okay, yeah, I just wrote already said. Sometimes I can't read what I write on the iPad. So, and I kind of thought if you didn't want to get rid of the 1 in 6, you could put it up under conflicts of interest. That's up to you guys. Because you're saying will not allow personal bias, conflicts of interest, or influence. You could put it up over there, but it still kind of says the same thing as the other ones that I pointed out said. And it said, it's repeated again in 1.2, but I thought, okay, so we can leave that there, and then the rest are considered gravy. But that's my recommendations for getting rid of those. I think it's kind of messy and unprofessional if we're saying the same thing over and over again. I like the addition of 9.4. I thought about whether or not 9.4 should go under integrity. I don't know. It's up for discussion. But those are the things that are just out and out blatant things that we should probably just get rid of.
I don't think we're going to spend the evening wordsmithing, but to your comments, I would just ask staff to look at it and make sure you address duplication, grammar, and stuff like that. Cause, it's just duplication. Okay, Mr. Perez.
Thank you. I have some some edits to it. They must have been lost in translation or through the tons of emails we had to exchange, I'm sure. On page 82, and go back to that. 1.1, if we can include the trustees or their
Designees.
those guys. Thank you. Page 83. Come on, little guy. If you guys are going to look at grammar, is 4.2, fourth line down. Board members will be professional in respect to one another, management, comma, staff, comma. So we're missing a comma there. 5.1, first sentence, to make policy decisions. Page 84. Why isn't it coming up? Breaches of this code, whether intentional or unintentional, shall be reviewed by the Board Governance Committee, excluding any board members whose breaches are under review, which, if necessary, shall make recommendations to the full board. So this has to go in conjunction with the next edit, which is signing this under penalty of perjury. So let's pretend that there's an intentional leak of closed session material or some kind of other secret. That could be a misdemeanor. Signing this under penalty of perjury with an unintentional leak is now a felony. You're signing it under penalty of perjury.
Let Mr. Jacobs respond, Ms. Taylor, to.
What's the question?
Repeat it.
The language signing under penalty of perjury, if we willfully or unintentionally violate this code of conduct, does that?
If you willfully, when you signed this under penalty of perjury, certifying that you were in compliance with the policy or with the code of conduct, when you knew that you weren't, you would have committed a felony.
Yeah, so we need to take that out.
So to take up.
Well, because this section says willfully or unwillfully.
10.1, I think, right?
The language about willfully or not willfully, that's 9.2.
9.2.
Breaches of this code, whether intentional or unintentional,
Shall be reviewed by the Board Governance Committee, etc. And then the reference to affirmation and perjury is in section 10.
Right.
So, Mr. Perez, are you recommending that the reference under penalty of perjury be deleted?
yes, please.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear.
That was in the original edit that I had, but again, probably got confused.
No, the drafting is always, they say, the making of sausage. Do not ask how it's done. Just be glad when it's all finished. It's a messy process.
Those were the only.
Just 1 minute. It's one thing to not wordsmith, but that's a substantive piece of the document that I don't think we just should go and start taking them out unless there's a concurrence of the committee, because that's a pretty substantive piece of the document itself. So I just would like to see if any other committee members or any other boards have a concern with deleting that, because that's a pretty substantive piece of information in the document. Let's see, Mr. Fackner. Mr. Fackner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand what Mr. Perez is trying to say, but I think if we can just work on the wording and keep the penalty of perjury, but somehow isolate that inadvertent piece that he's referring to, I think that would fix the issue. I understand what he's trying to say,
But at the same time, we don't want to give somebody a free pass just because it was inadvertently. It just won't be under the penalty of perjury. They still would be under the board's obligation or authority to discipline them, even if it's innocent.
The duty of care.
Correct.
Henry?
Okay. Yeah. Just a minute, Jason.
So-
Your mic is still on.
What's that?
Your mic is still on.
Yeah. So let's take, for example, a couple of recent allegations of people revealing closed session material. Those people will now be felons.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Yeah, okay. I got a list here, so I'm going to go to the list. Mr. Rubalcaba.
Thank you. Sorry. And I just lost my language here. Hold on. Shoot. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. I had some. Three comments. First, with respect to wordsmithing, I do have. I think there's a sentence that can be cleaned up a little bit. That's section 9.2. Let me get to it. Shit. The first sentence of 9.2, it's a long sentence, but I think it reads better if we add two words to it, the word including and the word that. So it would read as follows. 9.2, board members are encouraged to bring issues that may arise concerning compliance with this code to the attention of the president of the board or chair of the board governance committee, including any questions or issues, add that, THT, that may arise concerning compliance with this code. With those two new words inserted, it will read a lot cleaner and make sense. That's the first point.
Excuse, again.
I don't think it changes the substance of it. It's just.
Yeah, I know, but we'll be here all night if everybody's going to say, make this change. So what I would suggest is that if it's a wordsmithing issue, if you write it down and give it to Ann, and then that she take all of that information and then
sure, fine.
Do the document.
I'll be happy to do that.
Because I don't think we should sit here and line 4, line 5, because we'll be all night. But if it's a substance like Jason raised about that, that is a substantive issue, and so we should discuss that.
I have two more statements. One is more like an explanation. Ms. Taylor perhaps rightly mentioned there's a lot of repetition, but I think sometimes I understand the intent. For example, the whole thing about the precedence of one duty over another duty, I think the source of that is the state constitution. The reason it's there is because the state constitution also talks about that this duty is governing over another subordinate duty, which is to defray the cost of the employer or plan sponsor. That's why it's there. So I don't know if we need it or not. I mean, it's already in the state constitution, so I'm not sure we need it or we need to repeat what's already state constitution. And to speak, the third point is, I think it is necessary that we have that affirmation 10.1, basically that you will abide by this code of conduct, or else why would we have it? So there has to be some bite to it, but I am willing, as Mr. Rob Reckner mentioned, fix it so there's no inadvertently violation.
Okay.
Thank you, and that concludes my statements.
Okay. Ms. Middleton.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I definitely don't want to try to wordsmith. Just a couple of observations. All of us, before joining the board, were required to complete the fiduciary training that Ms. Dunning provided, and as I recall, we signed that document. It would seem to me that what is in that fiduciary training simply needs to be acknowledged, and that we certify once again we did go through that training, we understand it, and we are complying with it. And we shouldn't try to repeat in the course of this code of conduct things that are covered within that fiduciary training that we have gone through. I think that would, if we can do that, that may help to reduce the length of the document, which I believe would be beneficial. There are some fundamental things that should be in a code of conduct, and let's try to stay as close as we can to those fundamental requirements. I would make note, the only place that I find we are speaking to our obligations to those employers that are providing the benefits here is the one phrase, minimizing employer contributions thereto. And we have a fundamental obligation, I believe, that is broadly within our fiduciary responsibilities to do our best to make sure that this system is affordable, that it's sustainable, and that it is something that the employer community can support. And I was comfortable within the fiduciary responsibilities as I understood them from Ms. Dunning and from that training, that my obligation as a local elected official was certainly covered within that training to make sure the system is sustainable. I get a little bit more nervous when I read a phrase such as in 2.1, will operate in a manner where it places its loyalty to members as its only priority. That causes me to struggle. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. Ms. Middleton, I'm going to agree with you. Happy days. I do agree that the duty of loyalty and duty of care is different than our fiduciary training. We have the slides from January when we had our training. Ms. Middleton, you must have got it separately because you joined us after January. But it's very clear what our duty of loyalty is. And the phrase in the training is that above all, CalPERS board will operate in a manner where it places its loyalty to the members, participants, and beneficiaries of its members as its highest priority. It is not only. But why are we rewriting our duty of loyalty and our duty of care when it's already been prescribed for us by our fiduciary lawyer? And it's different. It's written different. I have, so that's mine. I do have some wordsmithing, and so, Henry, I like the idea if we all get sent the Word document, we could track it, send changes back, because they're all a little different. But, so that's one of my issues. I had the same issues with Teresa, that we're repeating the same statement over and over and over again. I do have concerns with 1.3, where CalPERS' reputation depends upon the manner in which board members conduct business. I believe CalPERS' reputation depends on investment returns, in my opinion. So I don't agree with that. It's also in the duty of loyalty. This is where I think it's different than our training. At the very last two lines, it says that we shall serve the interests of the CalPERS pension system. That is not our duty. It's our duty to serve the beneficiaries. There's also some problems with when it talks about integrity 6.1 and personal bias or conflicts of interest or influence of other people. We all have our personal biases. We're not AI computers. We all have our biases, and they come with us. And so if you say we're not supposed to have any personal biases, I couldn't sign that under penalty of perjury, because I do have personal biases. I do. I think it's terrible that we're going to have 9 board meetings and spend extra money to fly us up here when we could do it in 6. But that's my personal bias. More importantly, though, when we continue to talk about personal bias and you go to section 8.2, it says that board members understand they are representing CalPERS in and outside of committee and board meetings. Well, you know, I would have to disagree with that. When I am outside of CalPERS, I might be representing maybe my association or maybe some other group I belong to. So I want to be very, very clear that you have to be very clear that who we represent, especially people like that work for CalHR or SPB or even the treasurer and the controller. When they're outside this committee meeting, they represent their public agency, not necessarily CalPERS. And there are conflicts between the two, and there are biases. And so I want to be clear that you're asking them to sign this under penalty of perjury, and I think it's a huge problem. More importantly, when you added...
Ms. Brown, excuse me, Ms. Dunnan, you're listening because I'm going to ask you when this discussion is over to comment on these various aspects that deals with our fiduciary responsibilities and questions. So just be prepared for that.
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Brown.
Okay. And then this new section that was at a 9.4, this is even more subjective than what I think this document already was too subjective. And so this says, and this is for you, Matt, I'm going to ask you this question. CalPERS considers a breach of this code to be conduct which is tending to injure the good name of the organization, disturb its well-being, or hamper it in its work. So what do you understand that to mean?
I don't know.
Exactly. That is my point. We don't know what it means, and it could mean anything to the majority on the governance panel who's going to punish members who speak out.
I think the idea,
it's a problem.
I think
it's a
the
problem.
idea, and I've had limited involvement, but I think the idea is to be more specific about what a breach is. I personally am not fond of this language, but I think that's the idea, and I think that perhaps your suggestion might be to come back with more specific language. But anyway, that's my take on that language. I'm not entirely sure what it means. It comes from Robert's Rules, which is very old.
It's for running meetings. Robert's Rules. It's for running meetings.
Yeah, maybe I can help here. Robert's Rules of Order are already incorporated into CalPERS' own rules and guidelines for meetings. So this, as we've said before, is a very long document, but this is page 644 for those of you who want to flip to the back. And it has a section which attempts to say what does misconduct which might spark discipline, what does that mean? And I accept it's rather old-fashioned. I mean, this goes back to 1865, and that is the reason for everyone considering, and I think now agreed, to adopt Rosenberg. We're moving into the 21st century, but this is the 19th century, and a 19th century way of saying tending to injure the good name of the organization. If I was going to update that, I'd say reputational risk. Disturb its well-being. I would say if you're doing, let's take an issue like harassment, if your staff are being harassed, their well-being is being disturbed. It's one example. And likewise, hamper it in its work. If something is being done which is preventing, we've just been talking about this, is a well-intentioned series of requests for information impeding the investment office in doing its work. So that seems to be like there's three categories. It's a rather old-fashioned way of expressing it, but I think the logic behind bringing it to the surface in the code is this is already embedded in rules, but because the document's long, they don't get paid attention. Now, I'm all in favor, in the spirit of plain English, that this gets updated, and we talk about reputational risk, or we talk about harassment, or we talk about distracting people from their day job, whatever think is more clear. But it's trying, I think, to indicate that misconduct, which is not a crime, but misconduct, not behaving in the way the code sets out for expectations can have different dimensions to it. It's not just, I didn't wash my coffee cup after the break. There's something about behavior as a board member, which again may be well-intentioned, may not be fully understood, but it would be then taken to the governance committee to look at these. As I said, it's an existing set of definitions.
Well, and that is the problem. You can't ask the board to sign something under penalty of perjury where you could possibly be committing a felony when even our own counsel doesn't know what it means. And when you say there are dimensions, it depends on what the board governance committee thinks. There's no way any lawyer would say that I should sign this document. None. Not even Mr. Jacobs would tell me to sign this document. So I'm telling you, it's a problem. If it's subjective, I can't be subject to a felony. I know Mr. Perez can't be either. But I'm telling you, it's a problem, and it can't stand, right? You can't commit a crime, can you, Mr. Perez? Oh, well, I can, but I won't lose my job.
Okay, I think that's enough discussion on that. The concerns has been raised, and we will take another look at it, and also get eventually Ms. Dunn to chime in on this item also. Okay? Anything else, Ms. Brown?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Alvarez.
Thank you. I just wanted to discuss two items. I think actually it's one under confidentiality, 7.1. I think for me, and maybe this is because I'm so new, but it'd be very helpful to have any confidential materials, any information, including emails, clearly designated as confidential. So any items like the materials we're reading have a watermark that says confidential, that there is text at the bottom of the document that discusses how it's not for distribution or replication. And I think when there are sensitive email communications, there should be a similar practice. So maybe it's something at the bottom of the email in the signature block, which references the communications therein being confidential, not for distribution.
Okay. Ms. Yee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo a point that Ms. Middleton made, and that is I think this code of conduct is too long. It's kind of getting away, I think, from what I believe the original intent of a code of conduct is, and that is to really, I guess, address ethical risk, I guess. Is that what it is? I can't think of a better, well, I guess ethical risk. And I liken it to kind of more recently, having worked on some sexual harassment policies, but it really is about how we kind of foster a culture as a board of accountability for one another. And so I agree with Ms. Middleton. A lot of what's in here, I think, has been covered through some of the fiduciary responsibilities. So I want to kind of cleanse that piece of it. But it should really be about how we together try to minimize our ethical, reputational risk as a board, how we identify any potential unethical activity that we may witness may be happening, a mechanism for how we report it. I have questions with respect to sections 9.2 and 9.3 about how these allegations of misconduct get reviewed and whether our board governance policies are clear about that. But I think this should be simply stated. It should have clear expectations, and the consequences ought to be known ahead of time. And if the board governance policies aren't caught up yet with this, I think this is premature. I also think that the section that Ms. Brown raised about kind of the different hats that some of us wear on this board, I can say that I'm the independent auditor of the state, and I don't know that I can represent CalPERS necessarily outside of this venue at all times. So it's, I think it's just, there's some kind of just, there's a lot of stuff here that I don't think belongs here. And if we're really after how we together foster an environment of accountability, working to protect certainly the reputation on behalf of the members of the fund, I think it could be much more simply stated, but that there are some components that really need to be there. I mean, if we witness any of these kind of perceived unethical activities, we ought to know what to do about it. And I don't think any of that's stated here in terms of a process. And as I said, the board governance policies better well be damn clear ahead of this, because if it's not, this is way premature.
Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking maybe, and I know that we're taking this back and to the board or the committee that's working on this. All board members shall read this code, et cetera, under penalty of perjury. I think you can just do an acknowledgement. I've read and understood this, because that's how we do it at the state with any kind of discrimination policy and sexual harassment policy. It just says at the bottom, I've read and understood this. And if somebody gets in trouble for that, you put it in front of them and say, hey, did you sign that? So, I mean, and then you're avoiding the whole penalty of perjury, even though people who fake file their taxes with their signature, we don't prosecute them.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, a couple thoughts similar in that, an acknowledgement or an affirmation is one thing. Signing something, after the fact, saying I haven't done something is another thing. And the whole idea of, with knowledge, without knowledge, negligence, no, should have known. I mean, that's all stuff that I would think we would, if we wanted that kind of thing, we would be asking legal counsel for suggestions on language that would reflect our actual intent. And, we're all subject to a felony based on our behavior. And that's the trick. And then I still may not be a felon unless I'm adjudicated thus. So I think we really need to figure out what we want people to, if we're going to sign something, what's its purpose, what do we need, and what's the appropriate standard or language that we would want in there. So I would hope that we would ask our legal experts, what makes sense for what we're trying to do. And then the second thing is, when it comes to representation, I think we need to be much more clear to both Margaret and Betty's point, because my understanding as soon as I thought was, this is about reputational risk, and this is in the context of failures of good behavior, or ethical breaches, or how I behave out in the world that could reflect not necessarily the content of a talk I give on behalf of, say, professional scientists wearing a different hat. And I think we need to make that really clear, that that's what we're talking about when we talk about how we represent CalPERS out in the world through our personal good behavior or failure thereof.
If I may, Mr. Jones?
Yes.
To Mr. Miller's point, the legal office would be happy to work with whichever work stream this is. 4, thank you. And to work out some of the language and some of the issues that people have identified here. I think the critical part here is what do you want in it? And then once the board and this committee decides what the principles are that they want in it, we'd be happy to work with probably the same work stream and Ms. Simpson to work on the language and bring something back that would reflect that.
Okay. That sounds like a good option. Okay. And I'd also, at the same time, include Ms. Dunnan in that discussion, our fiduciary counsel, so we can capture her thoughts too. Okay, Mr. Rufino. You turn yourself. Okay, don't hit it again. Okay.
I'm on.
Yeah.
All right. I thought for a moment I was going to get censored before we even passed. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple observations, because we start saying sort of the same thing using different names. But the first thing I think maybe we need to think about this being a statement of value and culture rather than a legal document. The moment that you make it an illegal document, you start looking like the legal document, the antennas are going to go up and things are just, it's going to get really, but it should really be, and I'm not sure because we came, in January, so this was already in progress. We, quite frankly, were surprised to learn that there was not a code of conduct in place that existed already. Although, a lot of the provisions on the code of conduct, they already are in current law, they're in regulation, they're in CalPERS policies, but there's a lot of stuff that it's not in CalPERS policy and it's not in law. Things that we value, things that we, things that our expectations of each other, simple stuff. We don't need to create the Magna Carta again. That's already done. We need to create a simple document, a simple understanding on how we are going to build trust and how we're going to interact. Because without that, then it doesn't matter how many of these things you're signing. It just. So that said, I just want to observe that there's some other things. Yes, by the way, yes, there's too much duplication already, blah, blah, blah. But there's also, I think, some things that my boss in particular, the Treasurer of the State of California, would like to see incorporated, would like us to think about. Things such harassment. Do we value, is this important enough to be in this document to say unequivocally, zero tolerance, not once, not twice, not three times. We should at least adopt that standard, zero tolerance. And if it is, it's not even addressed at all. I mean, social media is not addressed. I'm not suggesting we should, but those are things outside of the realm. Lastly, the other quick comment is 9.3, which is still, and I brought this up, I believe, at our last and the offsite. The 9.3 that speaks to if a board member is found to have violated this code, the board president and/or board governance committee will determine whether the misconduct was and yada, yada, yada. And so this begs the question, who decides whether the president or the governance committee takes the lead on a particular investigation? I think that is important in order to make sure that we all understand the rules and that we all play by the same rules. So one last thing is financial disclosures. If I am a chief investment officer that I had issues at my previous job, is that something that you should know about? Is that something that we should know about? Is that something that the public should know about? These are just observations, that should be adopted rather than in this document, rather than make it, as I said, a legal document that turns into a whole bunch of antennas and to somebody's point, whether an attorney is going to tell you, hey, everybody knows. There's plenty of attorneys out there. That's why we have the defense and the prosecution. We'll find an attorney that tells you to sign it, and we'll find an attorney that tells you, absolutely, you should not sign it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Ms. Pascal Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my hope is that this is not a long document, but that it just sets forth what most codes of conduct do, and that is, recognizing that there's a path if things, where we want to go, and if someone's in violation of it, then we'll deal with it. But it should be a guideline, because Betty and Ms. Middleton are right. We want to foster a culture of being good to each other and to the stakeholders. So I think we need to think about it. We have Form 700. We sign the fiduciary form. We do all this training. So what's really necessary in here? And I don't think we need to do this sign under perjury, because if someone breaks the law or if someone misbehaves, Mr. Jacobs, tell me if I'm wrong, and it goes to, there's an investigation perhaps by this body or the Attorney General's office, that's out of our hands. That's in the legal system's hands, right? So we don't necessarily need to do that here. So just less is more, and let's not create a lot of headaches for ourselves. but we should have a good guideline on how, what are our goals? What do we want? Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Mr. Fackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of comments. One's to Ms. Taylor's points about so much repetition of the comments. At the same time, I will tell you, over the years, not just here but other places, constantly you hear, well, I didn't know that's what you meant. I didn't know that's what you meant. If you don't spell out every piece by saying the media, et cetera, so if you want to put it all in one paragraph, I get it, not putting it in 5 different places, but I think we need to name each topic, or somebody's going to say, well, I didn't know that's what you meant. And then we're back to somebody's subjective decision. The other piece is I take umbrage with Ms. Brown's comment about the reputation only being related to investment returns. Having lived through it, this organization took a terrible hit in their reputation because of a corrupt CEO and corrupt board members. It had absolutely nothing to do with investment returns.
Mr. Perez.
The challenge that Mr. Fechter and I had in developing this code is having it with teeth, but keeping it vanilla. And the reason we have to keep it vanilla is because we have no teeth. Unless you're convicted of a crime, that would preclude you from serving as an elected official. We're trying to govern. We're trying to govern good manners. So, yeah, I almost agree with pretty much everything everyone said. We could shrink it down, but it still wouldn't have teeth. We need to act responsibly. We need to act nice. We can disagree with people, but do it like grown-ups. So I say that to say beyond what's in front of you, it's out of my scope. And other than that, I would defer to experts.
Ms. Yee.
Mr. Jacobs asked the elements of what we might like to see in a policy, and I'd like to maybe start that conversation, if I could. Seems to me to set the tone, we should have in the policy what the expected behavior is for each of us as a member of this board. And then I think part of my discomfort about thinking about codes of conduct is that it forces you to have to think about what bad can happen. And I don't like to think about that because I don't think that will happen among us. But that's just, these policies safeguard against that. And then I think a section about what unacceptable actions and giving some examples of what those are. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's examples that at least help each of us identify what may be unacceptable actions that we would then elevate. And then I think the issues around process and teeth with respect to corrective action, all of that has to be spelled out in board governance policy. So the code of conduct references the board governance policy. And that's kind of it. Because we have, all these other things are kind of covered either elsewhere, but this is, those are kind of the pretty simple elements about how we can be a check on each other and how we can foster that environment or culture of accountability.
In our board governance policy does have action steps that should be taken when
for the review, right? For the review, or also corrective action.
Corrective action, even though the corrective action may not be as stringent as one would expect in some cases, but the governance policy does spell out what the president actions the president can take when a violation has occurred.
Okay, and we haven't. Not everybody up here has had the opportunity to look at that.
Well, maybe before we move forward, need to review the governance policy? Because it's a lot of information in there about
No, it
steps.
is. It is. Yeah.
And so rather than just sending back to redo this, maybe we need to have that discussion on the governance policy so everyone understands what's
Yeah, I think
already
that-
there.
yeah, that's probably the first
And then we
step,
could
yeah.
move that into the code of conduct. Maybe that's a process. that
Or just a
might work.
reference to it in the code of conduct.
Yeah, at least, reference. Because it is a lot of information in there. And it identifies some behaviors that are unacceptable. And it talks about what steps should be taken when that behavior occurs. So given that, but I'm going to ask Mr. You had your hand? Oh, okay.
Forgive me, I know everyone's tired. When I mentioned that a crime will preclude you from serving, I saw some head shakes on the board, and it's important to know the California Penal Code defines a crime. Crime is a violation of an act committed or omitted in violation of the law, forbidding or commanding it, which can be punished upon conviction. A whole bunch of stuff, but including disqualification or removal from office. Maybe it hasn't happened, but PC 20, that's the first thing we learned in the academy. It was a long time ago, so I forgot it, but.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, we've heard a lot of comments, a lot of views, and those of you that had some wordsmithing, please provide that information to Ann, and I'm asked Ann to work, if Mr. Perez and Mr. Fector could take another run with the support of legal and also Ms. Dunnan to see if we can craft a revised document on the Code of Conduct, but in recognizing many of the provisions that are already in the board governance policy. But you need to make reference to it. So if the two persons working on it, if you accept that, I'd appreciate it. Okay, thank you very much. So, yeah, so that's all of the questions to speak from board members. Now we go to our.
Do you want to ask her if she wants to say?
Oh yeah, Ms. Dunnan, you've heard a lot of discussion. Do you have any overview statements? And I've asked that you participate in the next round of development of this document.
Yes, I heard this robust discussion and that request that I be involved in the next round. I appreciate that. I guess my main observations as I read it, which I did in preparation for this meeting, are that there is duplication in it. There is some editing that's warranted. Some of it is already addressed in my fiduciary training. Whether it needs to be encapsulated here or not is a bit of a question, because often an attempt to summarize ends up being a little bit of a not truly true to the language of the law. So you do need to be a little careful about that. I think the thing, other than some editing that was warranted, that struck me, what actually really struck me the most was the affirmation. When I have worked on these sorts of codes of conduct in the past, and the ones I'm familiar with generally, used language more along the lines that was reflected in some of the comments by trustees, that trustees have reviewed it, acknowledged that they've reviewed it, and sometimes even that they will make their best effort to comply with it. I'm not familiar with boards subjecting themselves or purporting to subject themselves to penalty of perjury on this type of a document. I don't think that's where this document should go. So I agree that is a portion of the code, of the draft code, that should be changed. It was an interesting discussion about the new reference to Robert's Rules of Order. I was following the meeting when you were talking about changing the rules to Rosen, what is it, the more plain language rule. You might want to think about that in connection with references to more antiquated rules, as Ann Simpson noted. I mean, I could go through point by point what trustees said. I agreed with some, I disagreed with others, but I think that's probably done better offline with your legal department.
Yes. Yes.
I agree with simplifying and not duplicating. You have a very comprehensive and well done, in large part, governance policy. And while you want to make sure that everyone reads that, and perhaps they affirm that they read it. I mean, that in addition to affirming that they've taken the fiduciary training course, that they've read and will seek to comply, will endeavor to comply with the governance policy. That's something that might be a way of short-circuiting the repetition. But beyond that, I'm happy to answer specific questions, but I feel like I'll be getting into line-by-line edits if I say anything further at this point.
Yeah, okay, I think that overview is fine, Ms. Dunning, and so just ask that you do work with Mr. Perez and Mr. Fechner and our legal office and Ms. Simpson and coming back with another document. So we're not going to take any action on this, but I did have several people to speak on this item, so you still can speak if you like. Mr. Lennox? He's gone. Okay. Miss Martha Paerney? Mr. Al Darby, is he still here? He left. Mr. Hutchins is still here. And yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Identify
Thank you,
yourself
Mr.
and your
Chairman.
organization. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
You have 3 minutes.
I'm Martha Penry. And first I want to say thank you all so much for your due diligence and taking good care of my pension. I am, like I said, I'm Martha Penry. California School Employees Association is in favor of the CalPERS Enhanced Code of Conduct. CSEA would like to thank committee members Rob Fechner and Jason Perez for the hard work done to make sure CalPERS members and retirees like me feel proud and secure with board member behavior. This first draft is common sense. You are asking board members to be confidential and act professionally. California School Employees Association, where I served on the board of directors for 12 years, has a code of ethics for the board, and we have a code of ethics for our staff. We take board professionalism seriously, and so should CalPERS. Members should not continue to serve on this board if they can't sign and adhere to such behavior. If board members continue without professionalism and confidentiality when speaking to the press and others, it will continue to inflame the media and not be in the best interest of this pension fund. This new code of conduct should provide an environment where board members can enhance board partnerships to work for all CalPERS members. I noticed earlier under the board's self-evaluation of strengths, you show a desire for continuous improvement. I believe the code of conduct will help you achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
Good evening, Chair members. Dane Hutchings, representing at this point the League of California Cities Special Districts Association, education folks, and the county folks, all who have children, and so I'm the one who is here representing all of local government this evening. You know, we wanted to come together and speak on this in support and concept. Clearly, as first reading, there's clearly a lot that still needs to be done, and I agree with most of the comments made by board members. We don't look at this as a barrier or a gag order. In fact, we think it's long overdue. Specifically, local governments depend on this board to work together and not against each other, to work collectively to represent all stakeholders, to protect the integrity of the fund. Local governments, I said this before, we are the insurer of the benefits for our retirees and our employees. We are on the cusp of a market correction. Cities are bracing for a fallout of submarket returns, declining revenues, higher contributions, which will be spread out over a shorter period of an amortization schedule. I say this because local government needs this board to find common ground, engage in working as a team, and having a clear code of conduct we believe supports this effort. Not to get too much into the wordsmithing, but we do agree on a couple of things, most notably Board Member Middleton with specific verbiage to talk about the health of the employer, ensuring that they are too being taken care of, not simply just the beneficiary. Again, this is a partnership. If we can't afford to pay the benefit, the retiree doesn't get their benefit. And so we need to make that clear as far as who we're representing in making these decisions. We're all in this together. And again, and I also agree with Mr. Perez's statement with regards to, signing this document. It could, result in committing a felony if you were to violate. I completely understand, specifically with regards to closed session documents. If you inadvertently disclose something by accident, or, look, mistakes happen. But if you are knowingly leaking closed session confidential documents, putting the fund, and by extension the stakeholders who depend on this fund and their security retirement at risk, they should be held accountable. I don't know the legality. You can, whether you sign it or not, how that would work at this point, given that there's members already elected and appointed to this board. But there needs to be a level of accountability there. This is real life. We are talking about the security of our retirement, the health of cities, counties, special districts, and education districts. We want to make sure that we are conducting our business as seriously as it is, because it really is the highest priority for local agencies. And so with that, I appreciate that and support the motion to continue to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay. The next group is Mr. Woodson. Is he still here? He's gone. Mr. Neal is gone. Mr. Jelincic and Mr. Fontaine.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Jerry Fontaine, and I want to make a statement that I'm speaking for myself as a stakeholder. I'm not speaking representing the California State retirees. As a 24-year retired commissioned officer in the Navy, maintaining a top secret clearance, working 20 years with the California Department of Corrections with incarcerated individuals, and now a chief financial officer for a nonprofit organization, I understand the need for a code of conduct. And a code of conduct has to have strict parameters. Something I tell the people I work with, a group of very nice people got together and made some great rules to accomplish good things. They never make a rule for the bad person. You have to take that into consideration. Two things I would like to talk about here in 9.2. You're talking about excluding the person that's accused of the misconduct. I think that's wrong. You need to speak with that individual, whoever it may be, to find out the circumstances behind the situation they're being accused of. And in 9.3, I think Mr. Ruffino brought it up, having the decision made by the president of the board individually, I think is wrong also. It needs to be done by the entire board. And lastly, I've heard words from this committee of a discrimination, perjury, felony, I don't think they fall under corrective action. Corrective action to me is extra instruction, instruction under supervision, probation. Those terms that you were saying are punitive in nature. And those limitations of disciplinary action, I think, need to be laid out, whether it's a verbal reprimand, a letter of punitive action, suspension, dismissal. Those things need to be spelled out if you're talking about a criminal action. So speaking as a stakeholder individual, that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
JJ Jelensik, you're a public body and you have a legal obligation to conduct the public's business in public. You assert that CalPERS is a highly transparent organization, yet this is an example of talking the talk and not walking the walk. When the board president claims that it is both untrue and inherently misleading to say that the trust funds belong to the beneficiaries, when the truth is they do, and members should know what they are up to. This so-called code of conduct is really designed to hide misconduct, not prevent it. It was proposed at the offsite where business is not normally conducted, and it was proposed without warning. It was not available at the stakeholders meeting at 1 o'clock last Thursday. It's highly subjective, and therefore, by plan and necessity, will be selectively enforced. Teresa Taylor, the vice president, supported the plan and talked about the importance of confidentiality, and then disclosed and misrepresented closed session material to defend it. Really? Number 2, misrepresents the trustee's duty of loyalty. Number 4, misrepresents the trustee's duty of care. I would suggest you review the fiduciary training. You have a fiduciary obligation to the beneficiaries, not to the organization or the ego of staff. Hiding misconduct to protect CalPERS' reputation is not your job. If you want to protect CalPERS' reputation, prevent bad behavior. The proposal is subjective and will be selectively enforced. As in the animal farm, some board members are more equal than others. Let me give you some examples. Board member Mother disclosed per closed session discussions the CalPERS would not own the companies being created under Pillars 2 and 3. President Jones disclosed that per closed session discussions, GPs have been moved away and decided not to participate in Pillars 3 and 4 because they got scared off by the publicity. As I mentioned, Vice President Taylor disclosed closed session materials about an investigation. Discipline, none. March 2016, I mentioned an SEC investigation at CalPERS for insider trading. I did it in an open session. But you know how that got disclosed? It got disclosed because the Sacramento Bee reported on management conducting an adverse action against the people in compliance who found the inside trading and refused to comply with repeated orders to bury it. Different strokes for different folks. But I am glad you've decided not to do this as a first reading and take it back. Thank you.
Okay. Summary of direction.
Very easy to summarize.
Yeah.
I think that committee direction is, for the most part, with respect to items enumerated in the 7 series, subsumed within the work stream recommendations that have been adopted by the committee and that are in the record, and so I will just rely on those. And then with respect to 8, it is to work with workstream 4 and Ms. Simpson and Ms. Dunning on a new draft that is for the legal office. To do that, I would suggest that when you actually look at the board governance policy, that much of what has been discussed here you will find in there, and that we can probably come up with a code of conduct that is very short and simply refers to specific sections of the board governance policy. And so I think that summarizes with that editorial comment, summarizes the committee direction.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing no further requests to speak, this meeting is adjourned.
Very good.